Good morning all, and thank you and welcome to our diversity panel. I'd first like to thank you for taking the time to volunteer for this panel. It was wonderful to have you all here and express your views on this very important issue. I believe the panel here has a lovely blend of industry experts, current seafarers, the future seafarers, and diversity advocates. But for today, the focus of this panel will be not only to stimulate conversation in this sometimes sensitive topic, but to cultivate a safe and honest environment for something which can be something of a bit of a sensitive issue. We also want to come away with practical solutions. We don't just want to sit here going round and round in circles, repeating, as quite clearly can be presented on the slide, a very well-known issue. We don't want to sit here going around in circles. We want to come up with solutions and practical implications of that. And so, alluding to the supporting background, these are some of the most recent headlines in the past couple of years. It would seem that we have still quite a lot to do to make these kind of headlines go away. And so, in the first instance, I'd like to ask very briefly for each of my panelists to in a nutshell, what is the main issue? What is the main issue that is stopping a more diverse workforce when it comes to the maritime industry? What's the crux of the issue there, individually speaking? Danny, would you like to start?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I think the biggest issue for people is fear, and that's both fear of the individual in talking about their diverse status, but also fear for companies and organizations that might want to do the right thing, but might be afraid of getting it wrong. And so I would say that it's important in facing that barrier that companies are not afraid to work with unions, with ITF and others to be able to break down those barriers, because we've got the expertise, we've got the knowledge, and we've got the environments where people do feel able to talk about these kind of topics. And we can share that expertise with you quite happily.
Perfect, thank you. And Aubrey?
Yeah, good day. For my take, it's about more on creating the demand. No matter how many female cadets are trained, no matter how many female cadets are aspiring to become a future seafarers, if the shipping companies and the agencies are not going to employ them, those resources are simply wasted and unwanted in the labor market. So those reasons, such as masculine norms, values, and others aspects that we are facing right now, is actually preventing those companies to create a more diverse and inclusive place for us women. And that's my take on your question, Chloe. And
perfect, Aubrey. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Heather.
So I think one of the main issues when we are facing promoting a more diverse workforce is the actual ability to actually make a difference. As an industry, we talk a good talk. You know, we create hashtags. We create yet another international day of ... But I think what we forget is that even though all these good things, and they're positive, of course they are, they get put out on social media, but the algorithms actually stop the people who need to see it, seeing it. Now, we pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, that was a really good International Women in Maritimes Day. But the truth is, it was the maritime industry who saw it. No one outside of that got to see it. So we're actually kind of kidding ourselves a little bit. Success will come from going into schools and talking to people who don't know what the Merchant Navy is. Success is speaking to the students, telling them about our amazing industry, and seeing that glint in their eyes when they realise that actually there's a potential career that they didn't even know about. And if you increase that awareness, that's when you'll see a rise in candidates of all genders, not necessarily just female, but all in turn.
Wonderful, thank you, Heather. And Peter, your thoughts on that?
I'll echo some of the things that have already been said. I think fear is a big issue. Fear for those who don't want to out themselves or don't want to share their inner thoughts and secrets because they are afraid of what will happen, that they will end their own career or they will lose friends or support. Fear from the companies and organisations that we work within or for, because if you don't understand and if you can't appreciate what the difficulties are, you're reticent, you don't make the effort, or, as was said earlier, you're afraid that you're going to make a mistake. Actually, engagement is a big thing that we can help with. Move forwards, talk to people, encourage open conversation so that everybody becomes aware and it then becomes easier. There is a lot of good going on, but as has already been said, if you don't get the message to the right people, it doesn't make an impact. So getting people to come into the industry, you need to change the image of the industry. So internally, we can tell each other what we're doing and how we're doing it, but we need to tell the outside world as well, that everybody needs to be aware of what's going on. So getting the message to the right people and changing the image and the culture of the organisation.
Wonderful, thank you, Peter. And finally, Heidi.
So much of the things I want to say have been said, and I completely agree with them. I think it boils down to looking at it from two angles, which is you've got the talent retention and talent attraction. And when you're talking to people within the businesses as well, as much as it's the right thing to do, they also have to buy into it from a business perspective and a business strategy. Whether or not we agree with that, that's the way of the world. So I think for me it ties in with what's been said about the fear but the lack of in-depth understanding, because when we're talking about diversity you have to have inclusion, so you've got to work on your culture for your retention, but also for your attraction. If you're not working on the inclusion, your DEI washing, so you might go out and try and recruit lots of women, for example. We're hearing so much about gender, but when they come in they're going to go pretty quickly probably because it's not sustainable. But the other point I think that's really important that we make here is that when you look at diversity, it does go beyond just gender. And when you look at the makeup on board the ships and the challenges when you're talking diversity, you have age, nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and the generational divide as well, which in and of itself can be a really powerful tool for learning and development, but not if you're not working on your culture. So they're the main challenges for me.
Absolutely, Heidi. I think we can all agree that this is not a simple issue at all. It's highly complex and multifaceted, which requires a multi-targeted approach in how to better tackle these issues that we're experiencing. I would like to go back to that really powerful statement, first alluded to with you, Danny, and also confirmed with Peter, this fear. And I think not just from the people on board who are being absent, maybe of a minority in their ethnicities, their orientation, their gender, whatever it is. But also I think on the other side, the employers not wanting to get it wrong, not wanting to offend, and the easiest way to do that is to not say anything at all for fear of not doing something. So how do we normalize this conversation? What can we practically do to help these conversations and create these safe, open spaces where both employers and seafarers alike can have these frank conversations? Do you have any ideas on that?
The most important idea, I believe, or that I have, is to talk about it and to normalize diversity.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be sitting here, we wouldn't be talking about diversity as a whole if it wasn't for the incredible women of our industry that have opened the doors for us to be able to talk about this, and to expand the work that we've done in diversity across the maritime industry. So I will never sit on a panel like this without saying thank you to the women who have opened those doors. Speaking about diversity every day and making it part of our everyday work is really important, because people need to know that there are people like us, people from all walks of life working in our shipping companies, working on board our ships, operating within our unions. And when I came into the industry 8 years ago, there wasn't this conversation at all, certainly not for LGBT plus people, and for some of the work that I've been doing on that. And for me, that made me feel that I couldn't bring my true self to work at that time. But I persisted, and with thanks to my employer, Nautilus, they also saw that there was something missing from the industry. And so we've done a lot of work since then, working again in the footsteps of the women and the young maritime professionals forums of Nautilus to then expand this into areas like LGBT plus and others. And now when I look at the industry and having this type of conversation, having some of the work that I might refer to later within the UK maritime industry, I can see we are making progress, but I can also see that it needs more of us to be doing that, whether that's as LGBT plus people or as allies. Because a friend in Panama who's organising, or he wasn't a friend until I knew him, someone in Panama searched for maritime and searched for LGBT plus, and up came a picture of me. And when he told me that, I was quite worried. Because as a trade unionist, I'm not afraid to stick my head above the parapet, but also I thought, blimey, who else is searching this and finding this information, and how could this impact on me when I sort of work in other areas of the world that might have different societal or even religious beliefs on this. And so, as I say, the important thing that I urge everyone in this room to do is to talk about diversity, to talk about it as a whole, and make it part of our daily work.
Thank you, Danny. And I just want to come to Peter with this, because you've had your own experience in creating or being part of these open forums, especially when you came shoreside after your seaside career.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself in a position 23 years ago. It would have been illegal for me to do the job that I was doing if I had admitted my sexuality. Because up until January 2000, it was illegal to be homosexual and serve in the armed forces in the United Kingdom. Thankfully that changed. However, I didn't actually notice the change at the time. I was a bit busy getting on with my job, keeping my head down and not coming out to anybody. I eventually came out, but I'd gone shoreside and I'd actually left the Navy full-time and had gone into a civilian career in railways. I kept up my naval engagement through the reserves, and in 2009, 9 years after the law had changed and allowed me to be who I am within the naval service, I finally came out and had to tell, amongst others, my wife, my children, my colleagues, my Navy colleagues, my friends, and I understand the fear that other people have of making that big step. It made a big difference. But having made that step and gone forward and actually been very well supported by all the organisations I was connected with, the Navy supported me. I was immediately contacted by a friend of mine who I did not know at the time had been actively involved in the Navy's LGBT network. And he invited me to a Navy LGBT conference. And this was like 2 weeks after I'd come out. So I was a bit like, really? But what that did for me was it introduced me to a whole different view of what was going on. And it wasn't just about me and what I'd experienced, but it did help to start normalizing that conversation, because I started to feel a bit more accepted, and some of the language of diversity and inclusion, I then started to understand a bit more, so I felt a bit more confident to talk to other people about it. I got invited, because of my rank, to get involved with the Naval Service LGBT network, which later became known as Compass. In fact, it changed its name just after I stood down as its deputy chair, which was interesting as a reservist to be in that position as deputy head of an organisation, particularly when my chair was deployed to the Middle East at the time. Since then, I've been involved in a number of civilian organisations where either I've engaged with the existing diversity networks, or I've helped to try and start networks. I've started a few. 6 years ago, I went to an event at the Royal Academy of Engineering in London, and that led to the creation of Inter-Engineering. Inter-engineering was created as a cross-engineering industry network to connect, empower and inform LGBT plus engineers and their supporters. Still going strong today, entirely voluntary activity, no paid staff and no significant resources, but working across an industry where you've got everything from the large multinational corporations down to very small 2 to 3 people in an office type consultancies. It needed something like that, because you're not going to have a disability network or an LGBT network or a women's network when there's only 3 people in your company. It's a bit like being the only gay in the village, I suppose. So you need to connect with others. But it also helped us to do something else, which was by connecting people across the industry, we started to notice that there were groups who had not connected with each other within their own companies. And that led to the creation of staff networks, not just LGBT ones, but that's what we were focusing on at the time. It did lead to the creation of new staff networks within companies like Rolls-Royce and Airbus. And it also meant that we lost some of our volunteers because they then focused on their company network rather than on working with us. But they kept connecting with us, and we kept connecting different companies and different organisations with each other, which then spread the message and made the conversation more normal. There's still a long way to go, but I think engineering and the maritime sector have made great steps in the last few years.
That's wonderful, and so that's a very nice, sort of powerful, and a very, I think, fundamentally almost a very simple thing to try and implement would be a network to connect, which traditionally seafarers being on a ship in the middle of the ocean may feel very, very isolated, and being able to communicate with those with similar views and similar backgrounds could be a very simple and effective way just to start that conversation rolling. And I'm guessing this can be...
Even just creating a support network for yourself.
Exactly.
Within your own environment or with others who you can talk to when you're away.
Absolutely. And remaining on the sort of the theme of positive experiences of things that have worked for individuals in the past, I'd like to ask maybe a few of the other panelists, maybe Aubrey. You have been to sea, you're graduating in May, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
When you were at sea, was there anything that stuck out at you that was, oh, I wasn't expecting that, or this is really good, I'm actually being listened to? Is there anything positive from the experience that you thought this is really good?
Yeah, I have already finished my shipboard training, and I've been on a logboat ship for almost 13 months. And my take on that is that I was really in awe that our company, in my company, we have this called open reporting system, wherein it promotes and ensures our right as employees, that we are able to have this platform wherein we can react within what's wrong, any non-conformities or what's wrong with us during my stay on board. And furthermore, teamwork and social interactions with my officers, with my captain, with my ratings are all good, because we have that connection within that specific vessel. We have healthy connection with talking with each other, celebrating holidays such that, like normal celebrations on board, like barbecue party, and having a healthy environment within that particular group also induce diversity and inclusivity. As the only female on board, they are making sure that I am well taken care of course with no special treatment, because what my colleagues do, I also do that, of course, like shipping, things like, and I also, they're also making sure that I have training with regards to my cadet task workbook and other compliance with my academy. And yeah, I think that's really great opportunities for us, and it's a great platform that, just like what you have said, we all have that right to be in a place wherein we are comfortable of. Yeah, that's good.
Super. So, what I'm hearing there is that you've got not only just a normalization of language, but also normalization of behavior.
Yeah.
So you join the ship, and just because you're the only female on board does not automatically constitute that this is special treatment. Of course, there are certain requirements that female seafarers do need, which are different from males. But you go on and they said, oh, you're just another seafarer. I'd like to quote, there are no female captains, there are only captains, which was she of the sea slogan, which I thought was always very powerful. It's just normalizing not just language, but also behavior. Heather, have you got any sort of positive experiences from your very long career at sea thus far and continuing that you found were particularly good with diversity?
I mean, yes. There's obviously been a lot of bad, but given that we're focused on the positive here, I have 3 children. I still work at sea. There's not many of us who, for one, there's not many females at sea, but for 2, how many of those are actually mummies at sea? And I guess that's the reason I'm on this panel, is because, I am quite known as the mummy at sea. And I had the balls to go to my company. In fact, they weren't even my company at the time. I was on maternity leave. I had been working freelance. And I went to a company and said, oh, I hear you've got a pool of dynamic positioning operators. What does that entail? Because to me, a pool sounds like ad hoc work. And they were like, oh, okay, so yes, we do. Majority of the guys who run the pool, they actually work a fixed rotation, and they've got a set asset that they sail on, which to me doesn't sound like a pool. And so I was just like, well, I don't want to do that, because I want to be at home and have that work-life balance with my children. And so they asked me, well, what is it you want? And I said, ad hoc work, or if you want something more structured, I would like to work on a job share basis. So I currently work 3 weeks on, 9 weeks off, which of course is absolutely unprecedented, especially in our industry. I'm actually currently working on a drill rig rather than on a vessel. Now, I had hoped to get a job share basis with P&O ferries, but of course what happened last year, that kind of put that up in smokes. And so that was when I reached out to Stunner Drilling and said, what is this pool? Sounds like ad hoc work to me. And that's what I've been doing ever since. 3 weeks on, 9 weeks off. And it's just incredible. But more so, I know I am a female, and ergo, I'm the mummy at sea, and I can only talk from the female's perspective. But my back-to-back is a male. And I love that. I love that it's not yet another female, and that they're doing their thing for the women at sea. I love the fact that he is a single father. He's a widow. And he has the same issues that I have, that he wants to be at home with his children. So even though, yes, this is a diversity and inclusion panel, it's all about, in terms of the parents, full stop, no matter the gender. And that's what that's my positive story with regards to, working at sea and getting to have that flexibility so I can watch my children grow up, So, and I implore companies out there to start thinking about that, have that conversation, run some focus groups with females or with anyone, for single parents, and see, is there actually something that we can do as employers to make it more, inviting for people to come to see. And we've already touched upon it. It's about retention. If you want to retain that talent pool, you need to broaden your horizons. And I appreciate that there's logistical problems, and it doesn't work for every industry. Okay, but for the industries that it does work for, whether that's the ferry industry or the oil and gas industry that are on shorter contract lengths, I implore you to think about it.
Thank you, Heather. I just want to pick up on that sort of sense of, the fact you said you had on a back-to-back rotation with another man. And I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier as well about the whole sort of the risk of diversity washing, I think was the term mentioned. In the sense that we have all of this, these PR stunts essentially on Facebook, social media, International Day of whatever it is of the day. It's all out there, but there's never any real teeth. And I just wanted to link that back into companies who are now very much discussing this and also looking forward and developing their own strategies to promote more diversity. I'm hearing a lot of things on KPIs and quotas to reach a certain level, or we want 25% of our deck crew to be female, we want 15%, whatever the number, by this date. Is that the correct approach in the sense of we want to reach a certain target? And perhaps, Heidi, you can maybe come in on this with the sort of the data side of things and developing those kind of strategies. Is that the correct approach to say we want to get this number of females by this date on our ships? Is that the way we should be looking at it?
It can help to have an objective in mind. A hard and fast target isn't always achievable, and I think it also depends what you're looking at, because I think also we come back to gender an awful lot, and it's a very obvious one to come back to. I think there's inherent challenges with gender, and I think the other challenge when we're looking at those targets is the work that's going behind it. So if you look at the deep sea fleet, and depending on your statistics, that you're 96% male or 98% male, you want to retain and encourage the retention of the people you've got, whilst you also are able to attract new people in. So for me, when you're looking at those targets, I think I would always come back to first, it's about your culture. You want to have a culture where everybody can speak up. We've heard about that already today. We heard about that in the previous panel, about the ability to speak up, to have the support from shore. That's really crucial as well. That, you know, the ships aren't their own islands. You know, they have a community ashore. We need those touch points really engaged in this as well. And I think it's through that what we also see in organisations that we're working with as well. Different organisations come at this from different perspectives. Some it's about the culture, some it's about achieving KPIs or getting to KPIs and targets. For others, it's about reducing the volume of safety incidents on board. Because if you have a speak-up culture, and let's face it, we're shipping, we're very safety-oriented, we need to keep that in mind as well, because it's for the broader benefit, is if you have an inclusive culture, and a culture where people do feel safe in the way that you were saying, you know, I can speak up, I'm encouraged to. Amazing. And we need to see more of that, because that will support all of the other areas, as well as improving and enhancing safety. And therefore, the byproduct of that as well is your retention and your attraction will also improve. And we're seeing that that's one of the areas where we're seeing a real increase in the work that we're doing, is on projects like that, because it's those overall drives for culture that underpin everything we're talking about. So I think, long answer to your question. But.
No, absolutely, no, brilliantly, absolutely. And I think, having been a female seafarer myself, I was subject to one of these mass female recruitment campaigns by a certain company. And I think they recruited maybe within the first 6 months 20, and then another 20 in both deck and engine officers. And by the end of the year, their retention rate was maybe 2, 3 left.
It has to be done well. And I think we're seeing some. So there's, you know, we're working with organisations where, you know, I know there's one we were talking earlier with Hafnia. They're doing a pilot for a couple of years where they're trying to get 50-50 on board ratio, 50% male, 50% female. And that's actually going to be a really interesting project, because then you can also see and work on the culture, and you can work on, and doing it as a pilot allows you to explore and adjust and adapt and pivot as you need to as you go along. So there is some interesting work, and that target there is being done in a smaller focus group, if you like, in order to be able to build on the successes of that on a broader sense.
Absolutely, I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
I think one of the problems with having KPIs is because you tend to focus on one or a very small number, and you then imbalance things. It's a bit like the issue with you focus on recruiting, but then your retention goes. You need to be in a position where you measure, because if you don't measure it, it won't get managed. You won't see change, you won't see areas of weakness, you won't see areas of improvement. But if you have too many KPIs, they won't happen. And if you have the wrong KPIs, you focus in the wrong areas and produce the wrong results. You've got to see the bigger picture and look at what the effects are of what you're doing. But culture is the big thing, isn't it?
Culture is the biggest missing. And I think when you're talking about also see the bigger picture, it's really important, like we're doing today through this conference, about giving everyone a voice. So when you see things that are working well, it's because actually you've brought together groups of people from within an organisation, shore and sea, in order to have that voice. And actually each organisation is different, the challenges are different, the objectives of the business are different. The types of vessels, we were talking about it on the last panel, the tanker side, well, we're not getting the technology and new technology until the last thing, but others might be getting it first. So there's all these things that actually play a part in this discussion as well. So I completely agree. But it is the culture that underpins everything.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Aubrey, did you want to say something? You were looking at... No? Okay. I just wanted to pick up on the sense of making sure that we're looking at the bigger picture here, rather than getting so ingrained in just looking at this particular KPI, we must achieve this, we must achieve this. And I want to kind of maybe sort of link that to, I like to call maybe a bit of a chicken and the egg situation in terms of actual legislation and the guidance that is currently out there. I know recently the ICS have done the Diversity Inclusivity Toolkit, which of course provides very useful definitions and guidance into, for ship owners to promote this more open and diverse culture. But how, is that enough? Do we need more robust legislation from either from an international level or to a local level to actually properly define what sexual harassment actually is? What is inappropriate behavior? What is bullying? Does there need to be more from a legislative? Perhaps, Danny, you have an idea on this?
I think in many jurisdictions we have legislation that exists, but that doesn't stop people from breaking those laws. And so what we need to do is, in support of the legislation that exists, is to, again, make sure that our shoreside policies are on these types of topics are well known in our seagoing sort of environment as well. Because there have been times where I've been in events such as this where big shipping companies will sort of talk about diversity, talk about these types of topics, but talk about them and only have policies for their shoreside staff, which is important, of course, but that needs to translate to a ship of 21, 23 people as well. But if those 21, 23 people don't know about that policy and it's not part of a daily conversation, then there will be that microculture on board a vessel that is inevitable and understandable, and so could then sort of conflict with what's going on in the shoreside environment. So yes, legislation can improve. There are jurisdictions around the world where legislation is very different to that we benefit from in the UK and in Europe. But again, in many cases, it's down to employers, unions, and the employees, seafarers and shoreside workers to try and fix this together as well.
Absolutely, absolutely agree.
I recently actually did a bit of a benchmarking thing. And I looked at 18 different organisations within the maritime industry, some companies, some organisations, including the UK Chamber of Shipping, the International Chamber of Shipping, Maritime UK, Nautilus, RMT. So quite a varied thing. And out of those 18 different websites that I trawled through, only 50% of those mentioned anything to do with diversity and inclusion. And yet it is the hot topic that everybody's talking about. And yet and even out of that 50%, the majority of that, I actually had to really dig deep into their website to get at anything. And so it's all good talking the talk, but where is the action? Why is it not at the forefront? Why am I having to dig deep into your website to actually see anything? And it can just be a simple, in fact, it's the Nautical Institute. They've just got a very simple diversity pledge. And it's lovely to see. It's straight to the point, and it just lets everybody who goes onto the website know this is where we're at. Okay? And so if you're gonna spout off to do with D&I, do actually something about it so that everybody can see it.
No, thank you, Heather. They're very poignant points. I think it links to the sense that it doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing, doesn't have to be shouting from the rooftops, but it just needs to be present, it needs to be visible, it needs to be there. So thank you. No, that absolutely hits the nail on the head. I believe we have a few questions. I don't quite know how to put the slider up, but...
Currently don't have the questions up there. There's a number of questions around training. How can leadership be trained? and where and when can actually the conversation many of you refer to happen. But also Natalie from the ICS, from the Chamber of Shipping, I think wanted to give a very brief glimpse at the diversity work of ICS, and this is probably what you stumbled across also a little bit on the website of ICS, hopefully. Natalie, very brief.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's great that we've talked about LGBTQ, we've touched on the issues of women in shipping, and you've alluded to our toolkit, which we've recently published, which is great, but diversity, as some people have said, is much broader than that. And one of the resources we've not touched upon at all today, and I think we need to have a debate on, is disability, and also looking at how we can actually make better use of seafarers who are perhaps taken, who have to leave the workforce at sea. They've got other skills that we could actually be using in shoreside offices. At the moment, we're just sort of saying, you've taken a disability payment, goodbye, and we're missing a real opportunity to use some skill sets. So that's another aspect of diversity, which I think we need to be looking at. And finally, just alongside the toolkit, it's actually part of a 3-stage process. So there is also a diversity charter, which we would encourage every company to sign up to, and it's free of charge, I should say. So there's, it's just a way for you to actually measure where you are on your diversity journey. And there's also some work that's been done by the ILO that I think is particularly important on the issue of harassment and bullying. And I think you asked the question, is there any legislation? Well, any country that has signed up as a flag state to the MLC is bound to actually provide a proper diversity environment. And people don't appreciate that, but that's actually in the articles of the scope of the convention. So there's a lot of work on at a high level now going on about harassment and bullying, but actually all aspects of diversity are actually covered within the scope of the MLC. So in answer to your question, the problem is those countries that signed up to the MLC who don't actually appreciate that that is a requirement upon them. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Natalie, for those very important words. I was aware of the legislation in the MLC, of course, and the Diversity Charter, and the amazing work that is currently happening. We're not disputing the fact that things aren't happening, but we still just need to do more. And as I said,
I also think companies need to take it on themselves to enforce, because the legislation, it's really difficult to enforce. Companies aren't enforcing it, and I think there's accountability to be had from the people, the leaders. I mean, we're talking about the leadership accountability. And that's at sea and at shore. And you can have all the legislation in the world, but if you don't have someone who's comfortable in reporting it, then in the first place, it's not going to even get to the point where it can be legislated. So I think that what I also would encourage is actually the ship owners, the ship managers, anybody who's an employer gets involved and actually really pushes the programs of accountability. And it's not a one-off training program, it's not reading a piece of paper once, it's about a program which can tie in with career and personal development. It can be done really effectively, so it's not also a compliance issue, but I think that's vital as well.
No, I think, again, you've hit the nail on the head. So we can legislate and we can say what we're going to say and we can speak many words, but if there's not effective action, which clearly there is much work to be done, then what is the point in the beginning? So anyway, do we have any more questions?
Can I just point out something? These headlines, it does happen.
Yeah.
To males as well.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. It's not always a female thing. It happens to our male, all genders. It doesn't matter what gender. It does happen. It's awful. And I know, like I say, I know this is a diversity and inclusion panel, and that's all very feminine up there. But we do need to normalise it and talking about it for the males as well.
Absolutely, and conversation is vital to that, but also reporting and visibility, absolutely. So I think that is all for concluding the panel for today, unless there are any further questions that anybody would like to present to the panel.
I would just like to say one thing to the people in the room, and that is be bold and be brave when you're undertaking this work. There are big steps to be taken, but you do have the support of the ITF, your social partners, the unions that work with you. I had to be bold and to be brave when I came into the industry 8 years ago, and I wouldn't look back on doing that. Now we need to make sure that we can recruit from wider sections of society. We've heard about slowdowns in recruitment, about people not wanting to join our industry. The maritime professionals of the future will be more diverse, and we need to prepare ourselves for that as an industry.
Perfect. Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much for those words. So I believe, unless there are no further questions or other topics, yes, Cassidy.
I'd just like to add, there's a quick fix also. Thanks. There's a quick fix for those who really want to have ladies on board. The first time I sailed with ladies on board was 1983, and throughout my career I've sailed with them. And the last time I ever sailed was when I was sailing in 2010. If you have good internet connection, if you have an open command where they can come and talk to you, and most important, the shortest trips helps. So I was doing US, Canada, so within 2-3 days you're in port, so you have that recourse that you can go to talk to somebody ashore. You have internet connection where you can connect with people. So it is a deterrent that people don't want to try any tricks when you can be caught tomorrow. Plus you have an openness of command where you can come and talk to the captain at any time. That also helps. So it works on short contracts, good internet connection, and command has to take responsibility. Thanks.
No, thank you, Cassidy. And I think that's maybe highlighting what Heather said earlier, is flexibility is perhaps key in to be able to tackle some of these issues that we're having, remaining flexible and pragmatic to ensure that we are as open and diverse as possible. Perfect, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions before I wrap up the session? One more? Sorry, Rob.
I'll be really brief, and just building to some of the points you've discussed. I think it was only last month that a shipping company secured a $200 million loan from financial institutions, and that came with 2 KPIs. The first one was environment related, and the second one was related to diversity at board level. So I guess, what are your thoughts in terms of, is that the direction of travel? Do you see that? And for ship owners, is the benefit, is there, will this force an impetus of ship owners to take action themselves rather than allow external players to dictate the terms? Or is it a collaborative effort? What are your thoughts on these developments?
I think absolutely, it's when you look at the stakeholder involvement in this, you've got your obvious stakeholders of your current and your future employees. We know the pressure that's coming from there, but the financial institutions are looking at it, investors are looking at it. At an industry level, there's greater collaboration, the work yourselves are doing, the work of the All Aboard Alliance, which is where we're bringing together leaders from across the industry to promote change, and you look at the work they're doing for diversity at sea and diversity in maritime leadership. There's a lot of pressure now on this. You've also got increasing pressure at governmental level. I mean, in the UK alone, we've obviously got the gender pay gap reporting. We're looking at the ethnicity pay gap reporting as well. So there's a lot of increasing pressure coming, and I think the more we can also work together and at an industry level try and push it forward as well as at an organisational level. Yeah, I mean, it's a freight train coming that's not slowing down is how I describe it.
Perfect. Thank you, Heidi. And I believe you wanted one last...
Yeah, I just wanted to actually thank Francesco here. He mentioned something in the last panel that actually made me smile. All too often have I been in meetings or conferences where the seafarer doesn't get the voice. And if I've spoken up, I get shot down. Oh, we're not talking about the seafarer, we're talking about women in maritime in general. The seafarer, without the seafarer, there is no maritime industry. And I think that's what people forget. And it's that simple matter of fact. Without the seafarer, there is no maritime, okay? So why is it that the seafarer gets the poorer conditions? Why do the seafarers get different maternity packages to those ashore? Why is it frowned upon when the seafarer wants to go to their company and say, any chance that I can do a part-time rotation? Because the person ashore, they get to suddenly come back on a part-time job, you know, and only work 3 days a week. So why is it, and I get the logistics, I do, I'm not stupid, you know, but if you can answer those questions as an industry, you will see change within the industry, 100%. And you'll get more and more youngsters, females, whatever, they will come in if you see those changes. So thank you for letting the seafarers have a bit of a talk. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. And thank you to all of our panelists for today. I think for time reasons, I will have to wrap up today. So thank you very much for volunteering your time and speaking so honestly and openly and presenting your time here. And thank you to those who presented questions here today. I hope everyone here has something to take away with them in perhaps an idea that we can do with all the internal organizations. But without further ado, I shan't keep you from lunch any longer. So, thank you so much.